participants now. Am I audible?
Yeah, let us start.
Okay. So very good afternoon to all the participants and welcome to the third webinar hosted by HCL Foundation Academy. So, and I think that today's webinar is on the same line with me, that mental health is the need of the hour right now. And so COVID-19 has left us all anxious.
वीडियो भी चाहिए नहीं चाहिए
पर निधि और मैं एक कमरे में नहीं सुन सकते.
Hello all.
Hi Anshu, we can hear you. Hello Dr. Bhagat.
So I'll just tell the ground rules of the webinar. I request all the participants just to keep their camera and their audio on and off mode. And for questions, they can write in the chat box. We'll be taking the questions at the end of the webinar. Is it okay, everyone? Any queries? Chat box.
So, okay, Anshu, go ahead.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, Anshu, we can hear you.
Start. Okay, so I hand over this to Dr. Bhagat. Start the session. Hello.
I'm going to let me just say something about myself. My name is Achal Bhagat. I'm a psychiatrist. I head two not-for-profits, Sarthak and Adi. Sarthak works on the issue of mental health, and Adi works on the issues of disability. Today, we're talking more about mental health, so the focus is on Sarthak's work. But Adi also works on mental health and disability and the interface between the two, because Adi works across disabilities. I also am affiliated to Apollo Hospitals, and I thank Apollo Hospitals for giving me the opportunity to work with my not-for-profits in a free manner. So today's presentation, I'm going to focus on what is mental health, what is the impact of mental health due to COVID-19, what is the impact of mental health in the community due to COVID-19, and what should be our aware responses. And then briefly towards the end, I'll tell you more about Sarthak and what we are doing in the community. So let's focus on what is mental health. So if you were to think about the similarities that all of us have, what do you think would be the similarities? We all think, we all feel, we all act, and till recently, we all used to interact very actively. Now also we are interacting, but we have been distanced physically. But why do we think, feel, act, and interact? We think, feel, act, and interact because we have four journeys that we pursue. I think all of us want dignity in our lives. All of us want purposefulness in our lives. All of us want to be together. And all of us want to have control in our lives. As opposed to, we are moving away from abuse, humiliation to dignity, from lack of purpose and suffering to purposefulness, from isolation to togetherness, and from helplessness to control. Now, when we don't get these goals, and every day there's a challenge to dignity, purposefulness, togetherness, and control in our lives. Not just only in COVID-19 times. Every day we have challenge to our dignity. Sometimes when the PowerPoint presentation is not working, we lose control. Sometimes when we are unwell, we lose purpose. Sometimes when we are feeling low, when we've had a difficulty in our relationship, our togetherness is challenged. So while we're trying to attain dignity, purposefulness, togetherness, and control in our lives, many a time, more often than not, almost every day, there's a challenge to these goals. So when we are able to move towards dignity, purposefulness, togetherness, and control in our lives, we have a positive mental health. And when we move away from them, we have negative mental health. Unfortunately, positive mental health and negative mental health impacts are confused with mental illness. Mental illness is also a part of the continuum. It is one end of the continuum. Positive mental health is another end of the continuum. Unfortunately, when people confuse mental illness with mental health, what happens is that the stigma associated with mental illness, the assumptions of incapacity and dangerousness that are associated with mental illness get associated with mental health, and people stop talking about their mental health needs. So usually people with mental illness are seen by the society, wrongly so, and it's a stigma against mental illness, that people with mental illness are seen as people who will not be able to act and take decisions for themselves, or people who could be either be dangerous to themselves or to others in the society. Now, the moment you have these two assumptions, if you have a mental health need, you stop talking about it. Very much like COVID-19, everybody has fever, everybody has cough, but the moment the word COVID-19 gets attached to it, there's a stigma attached to it, and you stop talking about your symptoms. So mental health is a universal need. Whether in times of COVID-19 or not, it is a universal need. And because it is a universal need, I see it as a universal human right as well. Now, let's come to the next major thing that I'm going to underline here. Without positive mental health, human development cannot happen. It is the operational point of human development. So if you do not have a sense of dignity, if you do not have a sense of purposefulness, if you do not have a sense of belonging, of being in control of your lives, you will not participate in your communities. And if you do not participate in communities, the human development is unlikely to happen the way it happens. So mental health is the pivotal point of human development. So this is the concept of mental health that we're talking about, not only mental illness. Of course, when our thoughts, feelings, and interactions are impacted, there could be about 200 kinds of mental illnesses as well. And it's all right to have mental illness, just as it is all right to have any other illness. One can't blame oneself for having developed an illness. And it is all right to seek help for mental health and mental illness. Let's move forward. So what is happening to our mental health? Who all need to talk about mental health in the times of COVID? So there's the obvious group, the group 4. That is people who are living in the times of mental illness. People with mental illness who are living in the times of mental illness. People who already had mental illness who are living in the time of mental illness. Now, that's a group that is there and has been there for a long time. The average numbers in India would vary from one study to the other. 1 in 4, some people say 6 to 7%, some people say 10%. The most reliable survey, the recent survey in 2016-17 done from NIMHANS, will put the numbers between 7 to 10%. But if you add substance use to that, the problems will be greater. Then from group 4, let's go back to the group 1, which is the largest group that we have, the group 1, which is all people with mental health needs. That is all the population, everybody, you, I, Saloni, Anushi, Anusha, Tarun, everybody, Anil, Shishu Rajan, everybody has mental health needs. I am taking the names of only those people whose names are visible to me. I can also see Madhu has joined, and I can see some of my other team members from Sarthak have joined. Srimati has joined, Pallavi has joined. Welcome to my team members from Adi and Sarthak as well. So, group 1, all people have mental health needs. Group 2, those people who are facing adversity in the times of COVID-19. Now, the adversity might be because of their unfulfilled health needs, or because of the positive status of having COVID-19, or because of unsafe migration, or because of discrimination, because of violence, because of abuse, because of neglect, because of maltreatment. Those people who are facing adversity in times of COVID-19 may have negative mental health impact. That's a very large group. Not all people in group 2 will have a negative mental health impact. They may have a negative mental health impact, but it's the group 2, if you start working in the group 2 and group 1, that you prevent people from going into group 3 and group 4. Group 3 are people who are showing the signs of negative mental health impact in times of COVID-19. And group 4, as I said, are people living with mental illness, whether it's recently developed or it was there earlier as well. So these are the 4 groups in a population. And I, for one, believe that working with group 1 and group 2 is as important as working with group 3 and group 4. The usual interventions, people living with mental illness are stigmatized. There's a treatment gap of 95%. Even in Delhi, there's a study which says that 95% of people who need help for mental illness do not get adequate help. Group 4 is focused upon by tertiary, institutional, medical, hospital-based interventions. Now, those interventions, unfortunately, are not the best interventions for group 1 and 2, where you need more preventive interventions. And if you can prevent an epidemic, so let's say what is required by group 4 are the equivalents of the ventilators and ICUs, if you were to compare it with COVID-19. We don't have ventilators in mental illness, but equivalents of that. What is required by group 1 and group 2 are the equivalents of social distancing with adequate livelihood, with hand washing. So what are the mental health equivalents of hand washing and social distancing? Those are the things that we need to be discovering. Let's move on a bit further. Let's deconstruct the impact, the mental health impact a bit more. So how are the people thinking? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are we feeling? What are we thinking? How are we acting in times of COVID-19? So right now, I think we're just about the process of normal grieving happens in any society when they're faced with a disaster like COVID-19. So there is numbing, there is denial, and linked to that, there is this bravado that I cannot be affected by this virus. But at the same time, some of the people, the bravado is being challenged because the sense of invincibility, which we use as a defense mechanism, that nothing can happen to me is something that we use as a defense mechanism, is being challenged by a sense of high prevalence of vulnerability that we are feeling in the community. Then there is negative self-appraisal, which means that I cannot do anything for myself, I cannot do anything for my family, I cannot do anything for my community. There is a sense of guilt that starts developing. There's a sense of helplessness that starts developing, which is happening for some people. And negative self-appraisal and helplessness, when they get linked together, it either leads to risk-taking behavior or increased incidence of psychological disorder. There could also be a relapse of existing psychiatric disorders and a caregiver burnout that comes with it. Caregivers in India, more often than not, it is a lot is dependent upon the family when it comes to disability of any kind and mental illness specifically. So when there's a relapse of mental illness in times of a disaster like COVID-19, where you are fighting for survival, there is a caregiver burnout that might happen. Also, importantly, this is a technical word. Let me kind of explain that. Foreshortened view of the future. Uh, Whenever we are faced with trauma, our view of the future becomes foreshortened, which means that, let me give you an example. I work with survivors of human trafficking, and once I was, talking to someone, and I asked her, what do you want to be in 2 years' time or 3 years' time? And the person replied to me, what do you mean 2 years, 3 years? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So to me, that person said to me that there is no future, there is no tomorrow. So gradually over a period of time, the foreshortened view of future in face of an ongoing trauma develops. Now, COVID-19 is not like any other disaster. In other disasters like earthquake or tsunami, a disaster happens at a point in time, few seconds to few minutes to few hours to few days. The disaster ends and the impact then unfolds. COVID-19 is like being on the sea. What do I mean by that? There is no horizon, there is no land visible, there is no end to the uncertainty visible. There's also a loss of expertise. People who are supposed to be experts, health professionals, policymakers, everybody seems to be making predictions which are not coming out to be true. We're trying to build graphs and shapes and predictions, but at the end of the day, what we are saying is this is a virus we do not know anything about. We only know a very few things about it, and that is leading to further helplessness. Let's move forward. Now, I'm continuing to talk about the psychological impact of COVID-19 and some further understanding of that. Let's start with this word identity. Normally, all of us have multiple identities. For example, one of my primary identities is that I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a doctor, and whenever I introduce myself to other people, I say I'm Dr. Achal Bhagat. The doctor defines me. Then I go ahead to say that I work on the issue of mental health. But I also have other identities, like I like Golgappas, I like ghazals sung by Jagdeep Singh, that I'm a Punjabi, that I like communicating. These are my other identities, that I like playing with children. These are my other identities. But suddenly I realized during COVID-19, yesterday, a small child who lives with us, her name is Aradhya, I was sitting on the sofa doing some work on the computer, and now she was confused as to why did I not go to the clinic, why I have not gone to the hospital for so many days. And she came up to me and said, a 4-year-old child asked me, she calls me भैया जी. So भैया जी, आप तो डॉक्टर हुआ करते थे ना? To translate in English for our friends who might not understand Hindi. She was saying to me, You used to be a doctor, so how come you're sitting here? A 4-year-old child was wondering what happened to my primary identity. Now, if that child is wondering about my identity, obviously I'm also wondering about my identity. What is happening to our multiple identities? Unfortunately, this helplessness of COVID-19 is challenging our identity as to who we are. Of course, there is the other battle of identity, which gets linked to discrimination. The caste-based discrimination that is happening, the gender-based discrimination that is happening, the discrimination that might be happening with women, with children. Those other identities are also getting questioned. Somewhere the safety of being a citizen in a country, of being a human being, is being challenged. That's a very primary challenge to anybody's mind. Then there is perception and management of time. Let me also explain this a bit more, because it explains the other things that are happening to us more clearly. Normally, we think of time in a linear manner, and it has its advantages and it has its disadvantages. Let me talk about, at this time, it's important to talk about the advantages that we had of thinking about time in a linear manner. When I say a linear manner, that means time, there's a past, there's a present, and there is a future. So yesterday ends, today begins, and tomorrow is what we hope for. Now, when there's linearity of time, then what happens is that something that is negative goes back into the past, and yet something that is positive, one maintains a continuity with it through nostalgia, through memories of the past. In the present, we are focused with the now, with the here and now, and we manage the here and now. We are preoccupied with the here and now, so that the negative from the past does not bother us that much. And then we know that change is possible because tomorrow is going to be a different day. We are able to structure our time, and we are able to move forward. We are able to divide time into small parcels and achieve a sense of movement in our life. Now, with COVID-19, that the time is almost at one point standing still, at another point it is moving very fast. Almost every day the definition of what we are facing is changing, yet we are standing still. It's very difficult to distinguish one day from the other. So that linearity, losing that linearity, means that we are waiting for something to happen without knowing when it will happen, and that is creating significant amount of stress for us. Then let's come to the work-life conflict. We create a distinction between work and life. Although work predominates our identities, our time, but we create a distinction between work and life. There comes a time when everybody is able to switch off from work and focus on life, or everybody is able to switch off from the everyday problems of life and focus on work. Work has a purpose. Work allows us to feel that life is meaningful. Now, that is being challenged at this point of time because work and life are so intermixed and intermingled that work never seems to end. And Tarun and I were exchanging messages at 9:30 last night. Not a very helpful thing to do for Tarun or for myself, because both of us were tired of working through the day and we were still talking about work. So there is almost a enmeshment of work and life, and it becomes extremely difficult to draw boundaries in such a scenario, because there is always this pressure that we're doing something which is, as a doctor, one is told this all the time, and as development sector workers, I believe most of you are working in the social sector. As development sector workers, sometimes we are made to carry this responsibility that we are doing this for the nation, we are doing it for the humanity, we are doing it for the country, we are doing it for people. Essentially, this is also work, and we're doing it for ourselves as well. And it has a purpose for us. And sometimes when we are made to carry this larger responsibility, uh, where most of us individually cannot fulfill that responsibility, there's a lot of stress that comes with it. There is an impact on our performance. There is this need to uh, be performing all the time. Let me move to intent and impact assumptions. Uh, I know it's a lot of information, and probably, Anshu, after this, we'll take a small check with people as to whether there are any questions that they have. And let me just finish talking about intent and impact assumptions, and we will ask people for some questions. We are almost halfway through, so it'll be useful to check with people if we are.
Sure, sir. We'll take that.
Yeah. So intent and impact assumptions. What do I mean by intent and impact assumptions? Now, whenever something happens, somebody does something, we attribute an intent to that. So, for example, if somebody, for example, I was in the library, I crossed one of my schoolmates, and the schoolmate did not look past me. Now, I might attribute an intent to him, saying, "Bahut bada ho gaya, he's become a big man, he's not bothered about his old schoolmates," and I might feel very hurt and upset because of that intent that I attribute to the person. This happens in close relationships all the time. I mean, it happens at home all the time. In most of our relationships, it happens in work relationships all the time. You're reminded about what you haven't done, and one attributes an intent to that, and one feels hurt about why are you being reminded about things. Then there comes the impact assumption. For example, I was supposed to bring back vegetables. I forgot to bring back vegetables. I come home and I say, "Oh, I forgot." But the impact, I'm minimizing the impact of that in my mind by saying, "Oh, I'll go out and get them again. What's the big deal?" But at the same time, when I go out and get them again, I am actually increasing the risk. I'm decreasing in my mind the impact that I'm having, my behavior is having on other people in my family. If I say, "Oh, how does it matter? It's only a small thing. I will go and do it again." So sometimes we are making these impact assumptions. And again, we could go on with the examples of how relationships are being impacted because of these intent and impact assumptions all the time. Now, today, when there's a intent and impact assumption, there's a challenge to the identity, there's a worry about perception and management of time, there's a work-life conflict, and we are faced with ongoing adversities of violence and abuse and maltreatment and discrimination. There's a mismatch between demand and needs that we have. Of course, all that is contributing to the way we think, feel, and act. And that's negative mental health impact that we are facing. And it can and may lead to mental health problems. It can definitely lead to lifestyle risks. Like, for example, I realize that I'm eating more than I usually do. It's a lifestyle risk. For example, some people might be smoking more than what they usually do. It's a lifestyle risk. Some people might be taking more risks by going out more often because of the negative mental health impact, and it's a lifestyle risk. So it's at this level that we have to start working. And of course, the intervention cannot just be the only solution or the only way of preventing these mental health problems. One needs to learn skills to be able to prevent these mental health problems. One needs to be able to learn how to identify one's thoughts, feelings, and learn how to challenge and change them or accept them to be able to have positive mental health. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and see if Anshu has any questions that she's collected, and
Yes.
if I can answer those questions.
Yes, sir. I have collected 2-3 questions. So we are going to take 2-3 sessions, questions for this session.
Yeah.
So I have received this question via email. It's from Sonal. She's a state consultant, SPCC. So she's saying that, and also we see that many people are recovering from COVID-19 and they are coming back. But they are facing some society-related stigma and discrimination. So how to avoid that, sir?
Sure. Okay. I'll take that up later. But I will answer that briefly right now as well. But can I have the other two questions as well?
Yes. So some people want to know specific exercise or activities which youth and adolescent can engage to avoid the COVID-19 crisis. And one more question we have is from Shruti Mishra. She's asking, do you foresee any mental well-being concerns or strategies with very young children below 6 years post COVID-19? And what would be the mitigation activities for that?
Sure. So most of these questions, these are two regarding solutions. We are still trying to define the problem. Most of these questions I will be able to answer as we go along. I'll keep those in mind. Are there any pressing things that the whole deconstruction of psychological understanding of what is happening in our minds? Are there any questions around that? I would be happy to take those at this stage. I will come to the stigma about recovering and specific problems about youth and adolescents, solutions around that, and solutions for children. I'll come to that in a bit. If there are any other specific questions about what I've talked about till now, it'll be useful to take those right now.
No, sir, not as yet.
Okay. I'm going to move on and come back to these questions. Anshul,
Yes.
you will remind me about if
Definitely I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Great. So till now we were talking about the psychological impact of mental health. Now I'm going to talk about the social impact, although I've kind of mentioned some of it. At a social level, we are going to start seeing exploitation. Now, in disasters, as I know them, what happens is the power hierarchies become even more marked. So that means that some people are more powerful and some people are less powerful. Also, some people become protectors and some people become protected. Now, when people become powerful and less powerful and protected and less protected, that's the time when exploitation takes shape. So exploitation takes various forms and shapes, especially exploitation of the young, especially exploitation of the women. That is at a significant level going to rise in many quarters. And as people working in the social sector, we need to be aware of this exploitation because this has a direct link on how people will start thinking and behaving, the people who exploit and people who are exploited as well. Then there is going to be what is called a role reversal. COVID-19, people keep on saying, is an illness that is going to affect the older people more, and we are going to lose more older people. What we forget in that is that if we lose more older people, more younger people will have to perform the roles of the older people much quicker. So there is going to be a role reversal that happens because of the impact of COVID-19. I've already talked about the magnification of other vulnerabilities. I will not focus on that right now. There is also going to be loss of dignity through inequity. We have all seen viral videos of how people who are quarantined are behind closed doors. And at this point of time, let me talk a bit about stigma, which was brought up earlier. There's stigma about having a positive status. There's stigma about recovering. There's stigma about being quarantined. Now, where does stigma come in a society from? And stigma, whether it's about disability, whether it's about mental illness, whether it's about COVID, comes from two assumptions. And I talked about those two assumptions earlier. Let me repeat those two assumptions. One assumption, and both of these are intent assumptions. One assumption is the assumption of incapacity, that people who have COVID-19 are somehow were not capable of managing their own safety, were not capable of remaining healthy, and were not capable of doing something. And that leads to stigma, or will not be capable of looking after themselves. So that leads to stigma. The second assumption is of dangerousness, that people, and this is the assumption that is playing out more relevantly as far as stigma is concerned, that it's again an intent assumption that people who are COVID positive somehow are intending to be dangerous. They're intending to spread the viral load. They're intending to do something that is dangerous for the society. Now, these two things are leading to stigma. Of course, both these assumptions are linked to the fear, the insecurity that a society has about itself. And the problem with these assumptions is that they lead to a lack of empathy in a society. They lead to the otherness being developed even more so. And the way of challenging stigma, unfortunately, is a long process. And if we can learn two lessons, one from the HIV/AIDS movement, and the second from the mental health movement. Uh, Mental health movement tells you what not to do, and the HIV/AIDS movement tells you what to do. As a larger group of people, positive status needs, and disclosure about positive status needs to be talked about, and in a positive manner. That will challenge the assumption of incapacity and dangerousness. That comes from, and people need to start taking decisions about their own lives. People need to be allowed to participate in the decisions regarding their own lives in the long term. Just having a positive status should not exclude people from taking decisions about their own lives. The thing not to do comes from the mental illness movement, where we have allowed the myths and stigmas which come from disinformation and lack of information to prevail to such an extent that for centuries together we've been excluded and invisibilized. So if we are going to challenge stigma on COVID positive status, and it is going to grow, it is not restricted to just people who have come out of a hospital. It's not a short-term thing. It's going to grow as a much larger thing. As targeting of social interventions or financial intervention happens, that targeting in itself will lead to further stigma. For example, I remember going to Vijayawada to a project run for people living with HIV/AIDS, and I remember being taken around the village and being, people's houses being pointed out, and I being told that, oh, this is a person with a positive status, this is a person with a positive status. Even targeting of interventions is going to lead to further stigma. I'm not saying we can get away with not targeting interventions, but targeting of interventions, already you can see notices outside people's houses saying that they have a positive status. The notice might come down, but the mindset that comes with the notice is not going to come down that easily. So challenging the information is challenging the lack of information is extremely important, and self-disclosure and talking about oneself and participating in the decisions of one's lives and one's community are going to be the ways of challenging stigma. Loss of role models is another thing that might happen because of social impact. And that's, again, what happens is that as one loses people through a disaster like this, two things happen. One, role models get devalued. Second, role models become inaccessible because they're trying to protect themselves. And third, there's a loss of skill as well. For example, if let's say there is a COVID spread in a village with craftspeople, and a few of the craftspeople who were carrying forward a language or an art or a method uh, do not survive COVID. There's going to be a loss of skill and a loss of livelihood because of uh, this virus. And that's going to be difficult to sustain. The same thing happened in HIV/AIDS, but it happened over a period of years. Here it's happening over a period of months, and it's going to have a much more significant impact than HIV/AIDS. Then there's the sociological impact. Again, I've said that many a time. There's already a rising incidence of domestic violence. There's already a rising incidence of childhood neglect and abuse. There is a loss of sense of community, and people are focusing on their own survival rather than growth. All that put together is going to have a long-term sociological impact on the way we think as a community. And then there is going to be an economic impact. People's financial corpuses and assets are going to go away. Not that many people had those. Disability is going to rise. People who are recovering from COVID are having significant amount of disability, not only because of the social factors, but also because of the impairment of their lung function and other physiological functioning. There is going to be exclusion of people. Now, somebody talked about young children, and I want to talk about young children here. This is extremely important to focus on. So, what's going to happen to young children? One of the biggest things that's going to happen is malnourishment. The second thing that is going to happen is decreased immunization for other illnesses. Then what's going to happen is loss of safe educational spaces and safe educational resources. Loss of leisure, loss of play, loss of peer relationships, loss of time for parent to child learning, and loss of attachments. All this will delay development significantly for the child. And so the interventions have to be proactive, and early childhood interventions need to start coming into play. 3 months of a loss of safe educational space, apart from furthering abuse, has also taken away a significant part of opportunity for development for that child. And you can't play catch up. You will have to ensure that when children return back to educational spaces, or whatever education is happening right now, although it's very stilted, it's very one way, it's not as participatory as it can be. And it is very stressful to try and attend 3 video classes every morning and then try and do 10 worksheets after that, not only for the children, but also for the parents. And forget the rest of the country, which does not have access to internet or does not have access to teachers doing video classes. All that is going to affect children. And parenting skills are going to be extremely important, and change of educational goals for the next few years is going to be extremely important, and pedagogy is going to be extremely important to ensure that these developmental impacts do not have a long-term impact on a whole generation of children. This is the complex relationship that we have right here between the mental health and the sociological factors that we are seeing. They are the pre-existing adversities. On top of that is COVID pandemic. Then it is anyway leading to adverse physical outcomes and adverse mental health outcomes. And intervening, there's the psychosocial impact, which is leading to, if you're not being able to feel good about yourself, you do not access either the safety nets or the healthcare or the nutrition or the recovery and relief programs. That leads to a greater exposure to the virus. It leads to a more disproportionate economic impact, more violence, more stigma, more loss, and a loss of identity. And all this can be prevented by good psychosocial interventions and good mental health interventions. Putting in place those two aspects is very important. When I say mental health interventions, I'm talking about, remind you about the group 4 and 3 we were talking about when we started earlier. And when I'm talking about psychosocial impact, I'm talking about group 1 and 2 that we were talking about. If we have multiple interventions in place, we are going to be able to prevent negative impacts. Of course, we need to manage this for ourselves as well. Now let's quickly use the next few minutes to talk about personal solutions. These are values that a team providing mental health services should have. These values. People should be considered as people first, not only people with mental illness or mental health problems. Your intervention should be knowledge and evidence-based. You should ensure confidentiality. You should be focused on now and how. Why and how does not work. Digging about what happened in your childhood is not going to solve your problems for today, at least in this scenario. Your interventions have to be multidisciplinary. You have to have referral networks, and you have to have multi-tiered teams. Only MPhils in clinical psychology or MPhils in psychiatric social work or MDs in psychiatry are not going to be able to provide the human resource that is required. In all put together, we have only 20 to 30,000 people in India who are trained like that. Now, if we're talking about an impact that is universal, how are 20 to 30,000 people at the tertiary level going to solve the problems of a universal impact? Talk about human resource gap at this point of time. You have to, in the next few months, look at generating a human resource that is able to address every village, every block, every district. And believe me, there are still 200 districts of India which might not have a single mental health professional in them. So what can you do to help yourself? First is accept the context. I say this because people have started worrying about worrying. There's no point worrying about worrying. Worry is expected. Worry is normal at this point of time. If you were not worrying at this time, I would be worried. Accept that there is a significant risk, a health risk, livelihood risk, a social risk. Accept the risk, know your enemy, and you will do better. Accept that there's going to be a significant amount of change that needs to be brought into play. There'll be a change in the way we relate to people, the change in the way we plan our lives, the change in the way we work. Accept that there's going to be change. And accept, most of us want life to be fair. But unfortunately, life more often than not is unfair. Accept that we are going to go through a period of more unfairness than usual at this point of time. Once you accept the context, the risk, the need for change, and the unfairness of it, then you free yourself to be able to accept yourself. You can only be good enough in these times. Trying to be perfect is going to create more stress for yourself. Be caring towards yourself and towards the people that you know. And when I say be caring, be accepting of people as they are rather than trying to change them at this point of time. Be accepting of the lack of perfection that people have or you have. Good enough is brilliant. Perfect is not happening ever. Respect people for who they are and respect yourself for who you are. Respect your multiple identities. You are not just a survivor of COVID. You're not just a positive person with COVID. You're not just somebody who has recently lost a job. You're not just somebody who's responsible for everything around you. Respect yourself by saying, I need to allow myself to have all my identities, my linguistic identities, my national identity, my religious identity. I need to respect all my identities rather than just one of my identities. Accept that, and you will start respecting yourself much more. Be responsible towards others and towards yourselves. But remember, you're a duty bearer to some. And I speak this because I'm speaking to the social sector again. Sometimes we think of ourselves as duty bearers to all, and we are not. We are duty bearers to our sphere of influence, to our reach. And in being responsible to ourselves, we have to boundary our I'm not saying say no to people who are going through a very tough time, but I'm saying be sure that you cannot help anybody and everybody. You have to help the people that you can help, and you will have the power to help only if you are able to respect yourself and be responsible towards yourself as well. This is also a great time to know yourself. What do I mean by knowledge? Remember that linear movement of time I was talking about? I said there can be a positive side to it and there can be a negative side to it. The positive side was the past, the present, the future. And the negative side, I'm talking about right now. In the linear movement of time, we work so fast that as if tomorrow does not exist. We want to achieve everything today, and we do not postpone gratification. We want everything has to be right now or never. Now, that does not give us enough time to know what we want for ourselves. So we are purposeful, but we do not understand the meaning behind that purposefulness. Now is a time in a non-spiritual way. I'm not a spiritual leader, so I can't talk about meaning in a spiritual manner. But in an everyday transactional manner, finding meaning in what you're doing is extremely important. And finding meaning in your small little actions is extremely important. Because when you find that meaning, you're going to be able to survive trauma for yourselves. Other than that, some other practical tips. Have a structured day. Go back to that past, present, future scenario. Mark today as being different from yesterday and as being different from tomorrow. By doing small little micro projects that will allow you to mark today. Today you made carrot raisin cake or whatever else that you like. Today you made a roti for yourself. Tomorrow you will water the plants. Have micro projects that you value and that provide meaning to you. Make sure that you are not overwhelmed by information about COVID. Restrict your information intake to 2 points of time in a day. Half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening. The best way to do it, although I don't follow it myself, I should. The best way to do it probably is that in the morning or in the evening, whenever you choose to, get to know what's happening around you in your community, in your network. And in the day, get to know what's happening in the wider world. Because what's happening in the wider world will give you enough information about what's going to happen in your community tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge will allow you to accept yourself and move forward. So when do you start seeking help from others? When do you say to yourself, oh, I need help now. I have a mental health problem and I don't think I can cope myself. When do you seek help? So till now, I was telling you, know more about yourself, know more about the world, respect yourself, behave responsibly, skill up, read, watch, listen to webinars to be able to cope with your mental health better. be mindful of the time and structure the time. But if you have a change of behavior or change of feelings or change of thoughts, uh, if you're feeling sad for more than 10 days, if you're having negative helplessness, hopelessness kind of thoughts for more than a week, 10 days, and it is causing distress and it is causing dysfunction, please reach out to a friend, to a doctor, to a psychologist, to an online service, to anybody who is providing support, and talk about what you're going through. Because these are early features of your showing negative mental health impact. And you can learn skills further to be able to manage them. But then there are red alerts. If you're facing the social risks that we were talking about, if you're facing neglect, maltreatment, discrimination, violence, exploitation, please reach out to someone today. Talk about what you're facing. And if somebody reaches out to you, don't walk away from that conversation. I actually encourage all of us, please ask people how they're doing. Because sometimes just that question allows people to talk about their mental health. Sometimes we don't know whether it's important to talk or not. And if your friends or if your family, asking people how you're doing allows people to talk. Of course, if you feel that it is beyond you to be able to do so, then obviously look after yourself first rather than trying to reach out to others. It's like wearing a mask in an aeroplane. If the pressure goes down, you wear the mask first yourself and then help others. So if you're psychologically vulnerable, help yourself first, protect yourself first, and then support somebody else. I'll come back to about Sarthak in a bit. These are our community mental health responses. We believe that it's important to integrate responses having silos on health, livelihood, women and child protection, and mental health separately does not make sense at the level of the community. You have 4 different primary level workers going in, asking the same questions, doing a needs assessment, uh, not being able to address the need that is being put forward to the person because it belongs to somebody else or there is a budget line. For people who are planning programs and planning funding, please fund integrated programs. Finding funding verticals is not a very helpful way of doing things. Even if you're funding multiple programs, integrate all the programs together uh, at the level of the community. And just to tell you, we propose a 3-tier structure. Normally, people think of mental health as kuch counseling kar dijiye, do some counseling for him, as if counseling was a washing machine and you can put somebody into the washing machine and wash them out of their problems. Therapeutic interventions are multiple, but they are a very small part of the mental health interventions. What you need is almost a range of interventions, and you need, for primary level workers to form empathetic relationships, you need to ensure equitable access to information and resources. You need to provide interim direct support. You need to ensure there are informed safety nets which provide protection. And then you need to have a secondary level intervention which validates and normalizes what people are experiencing, teach them adaptive coping, enhance skills on looking after themselves, and support endeavors, small micro projects that will help them feel purposeful and meaningful, and then maybe have psychiatric and psychological interventions. And we are working with partners. These are Adi, Sehwa, and Volcom, our existing partners. This is our online service delivery model. I will not go into this. Just to tell you a bit about Sarthak before I end and take questions. We're an organization which has been working since 1995 in the community, and we provide services both for fees and for without fees in the not-for-profit sector. We build capacities of organizations. We've worked across South Asia on building capacity in mental health, and we think of mental health as a human right, and we think of it as a bridge for human development. Thank you. I'm open to questions now.
Yes, thanks a lot, sir. So I have got many questions. So
Right.
the basic questions that I have with me is like professionals are complaining of depression, stress, insomnia due to work from home condition. So
Right.
how to maintain work from home and work-life balance while working from home?
Right. So as I said, you need to be able to structure your time. The important thing is to remind yourself that your output at this point of time for the organization to accept that the output is going to be decreased. You can't expect the same output in the time of a pandemic as you would in a usual time. So expect the output to be decreased. Second, put limits between work and life, put boundaries, earmark time for work and life, switch off WhatsApp, switch off screens for work for X amount of time, exercise regularly, uh, have a problem solving and a role sharing meeting with your family every week so that you're not trying to figure out who's doing what all the time. Ensure safety by not going out in a manner that is unhelpful. Uh, Also, have a catch up time. Uh, do not keep on yourself, do not immerse yourself in the news all the time. If you follow some of these tips, stress can be less. But if you have significant amount of stress, for example, if you're sad or if you have decreased sleep, or if you're not being able to motivate yourself, if you lack interest, if you're not looking after yourself physically, please reach out to a friend, talk to them. Please reach out to a phone line, counseling phone line, and talk to people.
Thank you, sir. So I have certain questions from Mr. Amitabh Mehrotra, and it is revolving mainly around PWDs. So the questions are that due to lockdown, persons with disabilities have become idle and movement has become restricted, which is causing stress, leading to mental depression. How this can be reduced?
Sure. It is a people with disability are facing very specific and very difficult problems, even beyond just the lack of mobility at this point of time. One of the key things that one is hearing of is caregiver burnout and support for everyday activities. It's not that easily available. Of course, because mobility is restricted and movement is restricted, there is a significant amount of increased uh, worry and distress that is caused because of that. I don't have an easy solution. Probably what can be done is by organizations starting Zoom classes or in small groups where people can interact with people. Or the other thing that we've been planning for Delhi, at least with Adi, is a mobile psychosocial support team, especially for those with high support needs, to reach out to a cluster of people. We are also thinking about a group of volunteers which is geographically diversely located. Again, this is a solution for Delhi that we've been thinking, so that people don't have to travel to support other people. So we are trying to see if we can train a group of volunteers to reach out to people with disability in their homes. Sometimes a phone call helps, and sometimes a WhatsApp helps to help people feel that they're not isolated. But phone calls and WhatsApp, of course, cannot take care of people's everyday physical needs. And that's why we are thinking about mobile psychosocial support teams and volunteer training to be able to reach out through volunteers to diverse group of people.
Thank you, sir. I have a question from Ajay Samraj. So he has a question that suicidal among stranded migrants are high. How to solve the issue?
Sure. Uh, it's an age-old question. How do you solve the issue of somebody feeling hopeless because of a real situation? So just as in a drought or in a flood situation, a farmer who has a loan to repay, how do you address suicidal thoughts for that farmer? Now, access to information is one of the most important things that one can do to help people who are stranded and are not being able to reach back home. Communication between them and their families and support for their families is the second most important thing that can be done. The third most important thing is taking a decision about whether they are traveling back or not traveling back. Those are initiatives beyond the remit of this group, but those are the things that we need to continue to advocate for. Possibility of livelihood and what is going to happen in the future, problem solving will help. Then early identification of people who are talking about suicide, taking that seriously and supporting people by forming peer counseling groups or by providing phone access to services is an important thing to do.
Thank you, sir. So I have one question from Kirti. So she said that in COVID-19 lockdown, increase of domestic violence and depression is very high. And also, I just need to add here only that domestic violence also and child abuse is
Yeah.
also very high. So how can we work on
Right,
it?
right. As I said, it is important to recognize first that domestic violence is likely to increase and has increased. It is also important to recognize that child abuse is increasing and is likely to increase. I think more than abuse, maltreatment and neglect is increasing at this point of time. Uh, it will, they come hand in hand, they come sequentially. Abuse will also come through. Physical abuse first, and then sexual abuse will come through. These things don't happen independent of each other. Uh, I think education that is reaching to children through whatever means can be one protective factor. Uh, Social watch is another important factor. Helplines which are reaching out to women and publicizing those helplines, publicizing the childline number, but publicizing it in form of psychological safety and well-being, not in form of abuse. See, if our communication is about abuse, we are going to actually turn people off from listening to others about uh, from initiating action. But if our communication is about safety, people are more likely to reach out to these helplines and talk about what they're going through. A universal communication is much better than a targeted communication about abuse at this point of time.
Thank you, sir. So my next question is, sir, during this pandemic, the news is also coming that many people are losing their jobs and many are going on bench. So how to overcome this fear of losing your job?
By validating that the fear is real,
Hmm.
denying that the fear is not real is actually challenging somebody's dignity. The fear is real. Solutions have to be found. There are no easy solutions. I am not an economist. I don't know the solutions. I know the psychological response cannot be a, a response that does not acknowledge the problem, only magnifies the problem. So it is important to acknowledge the problem, think together with the person, use the time for reskilling, think forward as to what are the skills that are going to be required in the post-COVID world. People working on livelihoods should start looking at how do we address uh, new skill, how do we create new skills in the post-COVID world. The world is going to be different. Anybody who thinks that the world is going to be the same and we are going to return, one day there will be a switching off of this epidemic, is missing the point right now. It's going to be a different world. We are going to need different skills. We are going to need different strategies. The fact of the matter that we're at least talking about livelihoods in a mental health seminar is an important fact. That at least we're talking about violence in a mental health seminar is an important fact. Normally, people only talk about counseling and a phone line service. And I'm happy that this group is at least thinking beyond that when they're thinking of mental health.
Thank you, sir. I'll just ask 2-3 more questions. So the next question is, so we are seeing that children are going for online classes. So what can be the possible repercussion of the changing idea of classrooms, learning spaces on the mental health of children? Any ideas to transition to online mediums in a more positive way?
Sure. I will quote one of my sisters-in-law. I have 4 of them, so I can keep on quoting them all the time. So Pammi, who is a primary school teacher, has been a primary school teacher all her life. Even when she's not teaching, she's a primary school teacher. I took her help about this 4-year-old child who was not wanting to attend online classes. You can't have a kindergarten class online. So, because kindergarten is based on attachment, you can't actually replace face-to-face education because education happens between children themselves. Education is much more than covering a syllabus. Education is much more than completing an assessment or completing the knowledge of what is abstract nouns. Sometimes our pedagogy, previously we were becoming slaves to the goals of our educational system, which was defining success very narrowly. Now we are becoming slaves to the new pedagogy that we have discovered, the technology, the Zoom technology. And because of becoming slaves to that technology, we are not innovating in our pedagogy. We are stopping conversations. The communication is becoming more one way. Just as in this webinar, I would have ideally liked for us to be talking to each other more. And maybe in smaller groups, we can do so more effectively. So I think we need to think beyond classrooms to education through life. And we need to reinvent, think of parents as co-teachers, grandparents as co-teachers, and remember that a number of parents are not technology savvy and sometimes not even literate. Now, if you're going to think of them as co-teachers, think of siblings as co-teachers, think of friends talking to each other, and then trying to make this whole space safe. Online is not a safe space. It is unwatched and unmonitored. Online is also a very, very significantly risky space to be for children all the time. So we need to discover a new methodology. I'm again not an educationist. I can only think of the negative impact of what is happening today and deal with that. The educational strategies will have to come from the educationists. And there are a number of them in my colleagues at ADI, and I'm sure soon they will talk about education on this platform or some other platform.
Thank you, sir. So this was the question on children who are going to school. So now I have a question for young children below 6 years. So I have previously also asked this question. I'll just repeat. It's from Shruti. So the question is, do you foresee any mental well-being concerns with very young children below 6 years post COVID-19? And what would be the mitigation activities or strategies?
As I said, I talked about mental well-being and nourishment and safety and protection and education and development are all connected things. There is a lack of attachment that is going to happen. There is a lack of certainty that a child requires, a lack of unconditionality that a child requires to grow up. All that is going to be limited. So when I talk to parents, and parents are going to be the best supportive mechanism for children, uh, the the most important thing that a parent can do for their child, two things that they can do for their child. One is be respectful of the other parent. If you're violent or abusive towards the other parent, then obviously the young child will feel even more distressed. The second thing is stop saying no to the child. Make things possible for the child. Help the child to explore. We have a parenting system that is dependent upon do not do this, do not do that. It is a very directive parenting system because we are worried about the safety of the children. So moving from a don't do this parenting to creating a safe environment and allowing the child to experiment. The example that I give is that if a child falls while walking when they're 1 year of age, if you stop them from walking, they would never learn how to walk. And that's true of each stage of development. If you stop children from doing things, then they will not have their socio-emotional, psychological, physical development. The point is to help them do things and facilitate that it is safe, ensure that it is safe.
Thank you, sir. So just two questions we'll be taking. So I have this question from Dr. Payal Bhargava. She has a question that doctors are treating patients of COVID-19, and we have seen this in news also. So what makes these patients hit the doctors?
I think we are a society that does not respect what the other person has to go through. It's a larger question of the society. I don't think it's to do with a particular profession. The day this society starts treating the sanitation workers well, the policeman better, the teacher better, the same society will treat the doctor better. So while I'm a doctor and I'm always worried about the safety of my colleagues and my own safety, because sometimes people can be extremely threatening, it's creating an other phenomena on this, that people who are attacking the doctor are different than, and come from a different society than the doctor himself or herself, is not a very helpful way of doing things. There's no legal solution to it, I think. Law can only tell you what not to do. It's a question of helping people understand each other and each other's limitations. People have to understand the limitation of resources and the science that we function with. Science is not magical. N number of times, even if you know everything about the illness, you still might not be able to solve the problem. A doctor cannot create oxygen cylinders in a hospital. A doctor cannot create PPEs in the hospital. A doctor cannot become God. A doctor cannot save everybody. But a doctor must be empathetic, must be kind, must reach out, must give information. And I think if we reach out, give information, be kind, we can expect to be treated well. We are human beings as well, and we have emotions as well. And it's time people recognize that doctors are not robotic. They would want appreciation and they would want feedback. Of course, if things go wrong, we would expect negative feedback as well. But nobody has a right to be violent in any society.
Thank you, sir. I think this was the most needed question as per the news. Sir, now I would request you to just please give a piece of advice to all our participants just to maintain good mental health during this time of crisis.
I wish I had a magical wand that I could make COVID go away.
I think all of us want that.
I think three things that if all of us do, and I'm sure all of us are doing it. Uh, I think four things. Let's go back to care for oneself, respect the others around you, behave responsibly, and know the meaning that you're searching for. Small meaning. I'm not talking about purpose of life. I'm talking about meaning that you want to find in today's activities, even if it's painting with a 4-year-old child.
Thank you, sir. So, thanks a lot. And we have our director, HCL Foundation, Nidhi ma'am, with us. So, over to you, Nidhi ma'am. I would like her to come over.
Hi, Nidhi.
Hi, Dr. Bhagat. It was such a pleasure hearing you. I had to miss out just for a call for 10-15 minutes in between, but I was there since the beginning of the webinar, and such an apt topic, I would say, in the current times. I would say always, but in the current times has become a little more significant and meaningful for us to also, look at this aspect. I was quite, I was looking at your when you made the introduction, that it's not just about handful of people; it's all of us, the entire population, the entire demography that needs attention. One way or the other, we all go through ups and downs in life, and one needs a very strong mind out there to be keeping oneself facing everything with happiness. I think that's very important, that how do you really take care of your own self and yet fulfill your responsibilities. So joined here we have, like, our partners from all over the fraternity, development fraternity, as you rightly kept addressing them, and development fraternity shares a lot of misery with the larger world, while working very closely with communities, working very closely with care providers, and so on. And this session, the team thought, is very, very critical at this time. And after listening to you, I think the team was absolutely right that they brought it in these times. I would, on behalf of all the partners and all the participants who have joined here today, and the team from HCL Foundation, the larger HCL fraternity, I would like to thank you for all the time and great insights that you have given us. I think critical was that it's not, there's no stigma, there's no taboo, there is nothing. I mean, it's something one should be talking about, their own stress levels, their own anxiety that they go through, and if one really needs help, one should even seek help. It's as normal as any other disease, having mental trauma, mental sickness, very, very normal, very. And that's where I think your session with us, I would say, reiterate that message with everyone, to be taking care of your mind as you take care of the larger body. So thank you so much, Dr. Bhagat. And I know that Tarun is talking to you on several fronts, and we really need to have a way where we can reach out to larger number of children and communities who can seek help. Because I think one of the bigger problems that we face is that while people go through a lot of anxiety and a lot of, especially in the COVID-19 times, when people are, social distancing, and we don't even want to name it social distancing, it's physical distancing, but that has also led to a lot of social distancing, where a human being who otherwise is a social being is not able to relate, not able to have enough friends, the larger office work environment, which would break so much of ice, and bring people happily to work, and there was this whole routine which has got completely disturbed. I think working professionals also need that solace and that help. So one problem that everyone faces is where to go and what to do. So I think that is something that we would want to further associate with you, work with you, that how do we really have mental health services available for larger sect of people. And in our country, as we know that there is also a taboo attached with it. There is also stigma attached to it. And that is something that we really need to break away with. And we'll continue our association with you. We'll learn more from you on this subject. And thank you once again on behalf of HCL Foundation, the Academy, HCL Foundation Academy, and all partners and participants who have joined here today.
Thank you very much, Nidhi. And just lastly, it's all right to seek help, everyone. And it's brave to seek help. Don't shy away from it. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, sir, for this insightful session. And I request every participant that we